Well, I'm going to get to it and I'll be very honest. I was invited here by the lovely Anka Sal. And I think she's been inviting me for the past 2 weeks now. And I've been thinking, I'll go. But eventually I thought, you know what? Anka's an amazing person. And if she's inviting me to an event, it must be because there's something that is worth learning. It's something worth my time. And I'm definitely going to make a point to attend. So I checked with my calendar. And now I am here and I see these amazing people here and I'm actually loving it. I'm going to get comfortable in my seat. That's why I put the thumbs up because the seat is very uncomfortable. I think that the mood is cool. And I'm looking forward to what we're going to be talking about and just, sharing thoughts and ideas with the guys that have joined in. My name is Khobero, last name Kihupareti, but of course you can call me Cage. I am in Botswana and I'm enjoying the show. I am enjoying the show. Thank you, Anka.
Thank you, Cage. Thank you so much. Next up, may I ask Paul Murray, who is labeled Hanika Murray.
Yes, sorry, I hijacked Annika's invite to join in today. And let me say Dumela Ra Tukache, because I think that's how you pronounce your name. Is that right? So I'm taking a guess from what little I know about Tswana. I'm here because I've been missing out on all the previous sessions. Quite keen to see what you guys are up to. I've heard only good feedback so far, and I have been involved as a participant in mental health issues with my extended family over many years. So one picks up the one thing and the other and learns a few stories along the way. So that's me, Paul in Germany.
Thanks, Paul. And for anyone who doesn't know, that is my dad.
I'm your dad.
Up. Could I ask Nikki to introduce yourself, please? And what are you doing
I'm
here?
Nikki from Santon. I've been to a couple of the meetings and I have quite a few mental health issues. So yeah, I've enjoyed the meetings and they've done quite a lot for me. And yeah, I'm back. So yeah, that's my story.
Very glad to have you back, Nikki. Next up is Sinako. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, hi.
Hey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sinako, and I'm here because Anka invited me. We've been friends for many, many years, since high school. And so I really am interested in, mental health awareness. I think everybody should be aware of their own mental health, and also just, keeping in mind, your friends and family's mental health as well. I think this year in particular has been really rough, and it's always important just to have that check-in with yourself to see if you are okay. So I think that's my main interest in mental health.
Great, thanks for joining us. Next up, could I ask Rindai to introduce yourself, RMG.
Let me unmute myself. Hi, I'm here because, of course, Anka invited me, and I've listened to the initiative for a while, and I support people with herbal preparations that actually speak to mental health, speaks to well-being, and speaks to just having a person go into themselves and to just explore. So I use African botanicals that help to support people with mental health issues, and they are amazing. They just meet you at a point of need. That's what I can say. And awesome. Yeah, that's why. Thank you.
Thank you, Rindai. Good to have you back. Next up is Selena. Please will you introduce yourself?
Hi everybody. Oh, sorry, I'm in the dark. I'm Selena, and I've attended a few of these, and they're always really enjoyable, very informative. And mental health is something that I've been focused on a lot because I myself have some issues, and coming as like a cool therapy session. So yeah, I've missed a few sessions, but I'm back now because I think this is the last one for the year. So I made sure that I do attend. So yeah, really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Welcome back. Next up, Sandra, will you introduce yourself, please? You're on mute.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Sandra. I'm from Johannesburg. I've attended a couple of these meetings. I don't actually even know how I came to find out about it, or if it was on a link on a website. I don't know how I landed up here. I have suffered from depression, and like I don't know any family members or friends that do. And it's a very lonely condition to live with, because there's also the stigma. So I don't really share my experience with anybody, which obviously makes the depression worse because it's so isolating. So I've come along because I like hearing from others, and it's a safe place, and I'm with people that understand and that I can be honest with. So thank you.
Awesome. Welcome back, Sandra. And then may I ask Hanneke to please introduce yourself. For anyone who doesn't know, this is my mother. Such supportive parents.
We've had a lot of runaround in our family with various mental health missions, and so I think, like Paul said earlier, we've learned to tell a few stories along the way as well. So that's from Germany.
Great stuff. Thank you, Hanneke. And then may I ask Ruromai to please introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm here mainly because of Anke. She's a very, very good friend of mine who has been supporting me so much. So mainly that's why I'm here, to support a friend who has been supporting me. I'm scratching her back because she's always been scratching my back. But also I know that when people get around, there's always ideas to be shared and thoughts and big stories to be shared. And I'm just looking forward to the night. And hopefully, definitely this is not going to be my last night. Thank you.
Great. Welcome to Out of My Mind Box. Megan, please would you introduce yourself?
Hi there. I'm Megan. I'm Anka's friend, and we've dealt with a whole bunch of mental issues together in the past, and she always seems to hit my nerve in these little meetings. Hello.
Cool. Thanks, Megan. Your connection's a bit choppy, so I don't know if we're going to have much joy in chatting to you, but hopefully you can hear us fine. And then if I may ask Nondumiso to please introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nondumiso. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to learning a little bit more about other people's stories regarding mental health. I'm sorry if I'm not speaking according to the brief for introductions, but you arrived a smidge bit late. But yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
Cool. Glad to have you. All right. So just for everyone's information, this session is recorded. Usually we don't record our Out of My Mind Box sessions because it's mostly people sharing their personal stories. However, today we have an author and podcaster on. So I'll be introducing Johnnie Calloway. He is an author of 3 books, a podcaster, and a certified thought coach, as well as a storyteller and speaker. He's been a student in a Course of Miracles student for over 30 years, as well as a 12-stepper for over 30 years. So please welcome Johnnie Calloway, and I will let you introduce yourself further and take us a little bit into your mental health story. And then if we've got some questions when you're done, we can get to that. Take it away.
Thank you so much for having me here. First, I want to say, I hope you all can understand me as I'm listening to your all's accents. I'm like, oh my God, it's going to be like I'm speaking a foreign language. Yeah, because even people here in the United States have a hard time understanding my accent sometimes. So anyway, I'm very grateful to see how many people are here. It just really brings home to me that mental health awareness is growing, and more people are learning about it all the time. And the the need for it, because I think we're all affected by it in some way. My story, I'm going to give you an overview, and then I'll tie it all together. My mom died when I was 5 years old, and I grew up thinking I killed her, and the guilt from that was horrible. And my dad was a very abusive, very violent alcoholic, and so I dealt with that. And by the time I was 11 years old, actually by the time I was 13 years old, I was diagnosed as an alcoholic, and not far behind that became drug addiction. I also live with bipolar disorder and PTSD. So I've pretty much been the gambit of all of it. And today I can actually say that now that I'm on what I feel like is the other side of that, I'm actually grateful I went through that, because it gives my life purpose. And I can see it today as it was all a gift. Granted, even though I see it as a gift, I'll tell you right now, I am not willing to sign up to do it again, because it was hell. It was hell. So, like I said, my mom died when I was 5, and prior to her death, I was the epitome of a mama's boy. I went everywhere with my mother. She was, my God, she was everything to me. And she died very abruptly. And one day she went to the hospital for a checkup, and 6 months later, she still hadn't come home. And just one day she was there, and then the next day she wasn't. And it left a big hole in me, a big hole in me. And I grew up in what we call here in the United States the Bible Belt. And I was being told by Christians that, and I don't have any issues with Christians today, but at that time I did, because they kept telling me that God took my mother and that I needed to turn to him for help. And I'm like, well, why would I turn to somebody for help that just took my mom away from me? So I had a major attitude with the whole God concept. I didn't want anything to do with it. But somehow inside me, I knew that I needed help. And even though I resisted it, I needed help. So what did I do? I turned to the next higher power I could, and that was alcohol. And I grew up in a very alcoholic, like I said, violent, abusive home. And everybody that came to our house either to get drunk or were already drunk when they got there. And that was all I knew. And so at 11 years old, I got drunk for my first time. And after that, I got drunk as often as I could, as much as I could, for as long as I could. And there were a lot of consequences that came with that. I ended up being homeless. I came to Florida. I got introduced to more powerful drugs than I had been in Kentucky. And I ended up homeless. I ended up walking the streets of Sarasota with a size 9 blue flip-flop and a size 10.5 red one. I only had one pair of pants. I only had 2 t-shirts, and I didn't really care for much else. And then things progressed, and I ended up on a really wild weekend and ended up going to a 12-step meeting December 3rd, 1984. And I fell in love with that program at my first meeting, because people talked about things I thought only I had done, feelings I thought only I had felt. And all of a sudden I realized I wasn't alone. There were other people with the same struggles. And because I got an ego out of this world, I wanted to be the best at doing what they did, and I wanted to be a part of what they did. So I dove right in and I did everything they told me. But I was fortunate enough that the guy that I ended up going to the most for help, after hearing some of my story, he said, Johnny, he said, buddy, you got issues that just the 12 steps aren't going to help. He said, you're going to need some outside help. And because I told him about my childhood, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, and all the other crap that I had lived through. And he said, the steps alone aren't going aren't going to do it for you. So I did that. I sought out professional help, and all the right people were put in my place, put in my life, and I managed to be willing to listen to them. I had one really cool thing going in my favor. By the time I went to that first meeting, there was one thing more than anything else that I was absolutely convinced of. My way wasn't working. So that opened my mind to be willing to listen to somebody else. So because there were so many issues in my way of living due to the dysfunction that I grew up in, I mean, man, when you're growing up in a house with my grandmother was like the overseer of everything, and my dad was constantly beating her up. I think there were at least 3 and maybe 4 times that he broke her arm. One time he broke her ankle. He used to beat the crap out of my sister. Those things, growing up in that, they leave scars. And unfortunately, as a child, you pick up that, because even though they were doing those things, they were constantly saying, I love you. So I grew up thinking that all of this crap that I was living in was love, and then ended up recreating it in my adult life. And I stayed with recovery for 7 years before I relapsed, and I relapsed for 6 weeks. Kind of a funny part of that relapse is 3 weeks into that relapse, I totaled a car and I broke my nose. And when I broke my nose, it was bent in like 3 or 4 different directions. And the doctor said, Mr. Calloway, we can't fix that without major surgery. Well, 3 weeks later, the last night of that relapse, I totaled another car, broke my nose again, and it straightened my nose right back out. So it was kind of like God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. So, and that was the last night of that relapse. And it was difficult coming back from that, because I had already written my first book, Taming the Dragon, and I thought I was supposed to know. I thought, and I wanted everybody else to think I did know. Now then I've relapsed, and it's like everybody knows I don't know. So it was very humbling to have to go back to the meetings and pick up another beginner's chip. But I did, and I faced the humiliation of it, and I grew through it, and I'm grateful today that that happened. But like I said, I don't want to sign up to do it again, because it was very painful. So my life goes on, and I keep trying to progress in life and become that responsible, productive member of society that we talk about in the 12-step rooms. And I would get going and things would be going great. I'd buy a piece of property and then I'd lose it. I'd start a business and then I'd lose it. And I kept getting up and I kept falling down, and I kept getting up and I kept falling down. But the thing is, there were always people standing there to help me get back up. I was suicidal a lot. In my youth, I attempted suicide a couple of times. I ended up, all in all, I had 4 suicide attempts. So grateful they didn't work, because I enjoy my life today for the most part. And I get to do what I always dreamed of doing, and that's helping people. Even when I was at my worst, I always wanted to be at a place where I could help people. And so then I had this major crash in 2008 with the bipolar and the PTSD and the anxiety attacks and the panic attacks and the clinical depression, and consumed with suicidal ideations. And I ended up in the hospital. In the process of getting to that point, I had seen a few psychiatrists, been on several medications, but when I got to the hospital and got checked in, the doctor, after reading all my charts, he said, Mr. Calloway, we don't know what to do with you. Based on your charts, you've taken every medication that we would try to put you on. So it just seems like the medications aren't working. So we want to suggest to you that you do electroconvulsive shock treatments. Now, I was so far gone at that time. the way I like to say it is I had just enough of my mind left to know that my mind was gone. And I'm telling you, that is hell in and of itself. When you realize that I had enough recovery and growth under my belt at that time that I knew there was another way. But no matter what I did, I couldn't get back to that. I spent most of my days laying in the floor in a fetal position, feeling absolutely useless to the world. I had spent years at that time, over 20, of being there for other people and helping them get through their stuff. And now then, I don't want to hear about your stuff. I want you to understand how I'm hurting, and I want out of my pain. And when I was at the place where I could no longer help my friends and when I could no longer be there, that was an incredible torment, to be so absent in my own life and feel like I had absolutely no control. After I got out of that hospital, I went to a homeless shelter because I no longer had a place to live by the time I got to the hospital. And I ended up seeing this new therapist, and he said to me, he said, after I ranted for about 20 minutes about, okay, I've got this many years in 12-step recovery. I've got this many years in A Course in Miracles. I've written a book. I've taught Course in Miracles classes, yada, 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 trying to present myself, trying to hold on desperately to something that I could be proud of. And when I was through, he looked at me and he said, man, you are not going to like what I got to say. And I said, well, it probably means I really need to hear it. He said, man, you don't know who God is. He said, I don't care how many books you've written. I don't care how many Course in Miracles classes you've attended or taught. He said, you don't know who God is. And he said, until you get God in this mix, you're going to stay nuts. He said, so I suggest that you go back to the homeless shelter and you sit down and you write a letter to you from God. I wrote that first letter, and it started something for me. I wrote those letters every day for over 5 years, and sometimes I wrote those letters 3 and 4 times a day because they got me out of the insanity of my mind and into some sort of loving place, because those letters were always loving, encouraging, gentle, and kind. There was never a, you need to do this or you shouldn't have done that. It was always encouraging and telling me that now it's time for you to love yourself. I didn't realize it until afterwards, or till way into it anyway, but what was going on while I was doing all that letter writing was I was changing my internal dialogue. I was changing the way that I talked to myself. I started talking to me like God would talk to me, and being loving, encouraging, gentle, and kind with myself. And I had no idea going into that just how much I still berated myself, even with all those years of recovery and all the therapists I had seen and all the workshops I had gone to. I had just learned how to be more subtle about it. More, not just out and out, just beating myself up. It was like, so by changing my internal dialogue, I totally changed my life. And good things started happening for me. I stopped creating all the insanity myself. And one of the things that Anki said about me is I'm a certified thought coach. And a lot of people are like, well, what in the world is that? Well, what I've learned in my process is that everything starts with my thinking. Everything. My depression starts with the way I'm thinking about what's going on around me. So if I can catch myself as I start down that dark hole and say, wait a minute, I can think about this differently. I can see this in another way, and I can start turning myself around, but I got to be able to do an honest investigation of my thoughts. And when I can do that, I haven't had a depressive episode, a panic attack, or an anxiety attack now in over 8 years. And I take my medications. And my thing with the medications is my medication will not make me happy. Medication is meant to stabilize my brain chemistry enough that I can think and that I can do the work to get better. So many people I've tried to work with approach the medication as though, well, I'm taking my meds. Why am I not getting any better? Well, you got to do the mental work along with the medication. And it's not an easy thing to do, to constantly be honest with myself, to constantly, and some of the truths, I'm going through a situation right now where I just revealed a truth about myself that I really wanted to think I was past, but I'm not. And to deny it will not heal it. So I've learned that I got to face my fears head on. And a lot of my fears show up as character defects. So I have to be willing to look at all of that. So today I get to live my dream. I get to do things like this, talk with you guys, and hopefully bring a little hope to somebody's life, because at the root of depression, at the root of anxiety and panic attacks is fear. It's all fear. And if I can, at least that's my belief, and if I can start approaching the fear that comes up for me with the love that is within me, then I can recover, and I can become self-empowered and be more in control of my own life. There's like 3 sayings that I hold on to dearly. One of them is, nothing happens to me. Everything happens for me. Everything is a gift. All of those dark tunnels I went down with the depression, the anxiety, the panic, when I decided I could look at all of that differently, and I took not blame, but some responsibility for what goes on in my life, I gained the power to start healing myself. The other one is, we don't see what we look at, we see what we look for. If I'm looking for love in the world, I'll find it. If I'm looking for fear and pain and all the other stuff that fear shows up as, I'll find it. So I have to be vigilant. And with what's going on in the world today, I'll be the first to say it is really, really difficult. But I have to look for love where the fear is showing up. I have to be willing to look around what my eyes report to me for what my soul can report to me, and remind myself that there is a God, and it ain't me, and I can grow in that place. So, and then the other one that I hold on to is, in order for me to attain to become self-empowered and to attain personal freedom, I must take spiritual responsibility for my physical experience. And I have to watch my thinking. I have to watch my thinking, because it can very subtly lead me down a darkness that it's really difficult to get back out of. So I have no idea how long I've talked. I do not have a clock in my little sound room here. But I'm going to say that's pretty much what I've got for you. And I hope in some way I helped somebody. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Much appreciate you sharing your story with us. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a few questions based on what you've shared with us, and we can just have a bit of a further discussion. If any of the people in the audience have a question, type it in the chat and we can address that as well. I'm curious how the experience of writing a book was for you, and how the first one came about. And then if you could tell us a little bit more about your most recent book and what it really covers. I think it's Dragons to Butterflies, The Metamorphosis of a Man.
Okay. Ever since I first got into 12-step recovery and people started learning little bits and pieces about my life, people started telling me almost right away that I needed to write a book. And I don't have an education. I got kicked out of school in the 10th grade and sent to a reform school. I took a GED while I was there and passed it. So I never had to write a term paper or any kind of written paper in school. So I'm like, I don't know how to write. And people kept saying, well, you need to figure out how to write and you need to write your story. That went on for a long time. And then finally in 1990, I wrote actually the first book, which was Taming the Dragon. And it was a major flop. But there's so much to the literary world that most people just do not know until you dive into it. And it was, I just didn't. And so that went nowhere. And I just pretty much took writing off of the table for myself at that point. And then in 2015, I met a New York Times bestselling author that had written a book about his childhood. And he heard my story and read my first book. And he said, Johnny, you got to write. He said, you got to tell your story. And it's almost like he gave me permission to do so. Like I was waiting for somebody to say it was okay. And I sat down and I started writing. And 9 weeks later, I had written 22 chapters. Because once I started writing, I could not stop. And but what I also had to do, because I was telling the brutal truth of my childhood and my life, my adult life, I don't think there's any place in my book where it makes me sound like some kind of hero, because I told the truth about the things I did during my drug addiction. I told the truth about the things with my family. Toward the end of the 9 weeks and the 22 chapters, I thought, well, I'm going to look for a publisher, and I did, and they went right on it. But I had to pay big time. I had no idea what the real world of publishing was about still, and it was scary. But every day since then, I've had to step into new roles. Like I've had to learn about social media, which I knew nothing about going in. I've had to learn about trying to market myself. I've had to learn how to do these talks. I've had to learn how to be real with people, because what I know based on my own experience, the people that have helped me the most are the people that got real with me, the people that told me the truth about their experience. And the thing is, if you've been in there, in that ditch, in that darkness, you know when somebody's sharing with you and they're coming from a real place. You just do. And you know when somebody's giving you a line of crap at the same time. So that's how Dragons to Butterflies came about. Then I wrote a book that is the first part of a trilogy called The Bridge. And it's about the power of connecting. It's actually, the title is The Bridge, Where Souls Connect. And it's the first part of a trilogy. But the book I'm actually the most excited about is the one that's going to be coming out in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And it's called The Final Mile, Tales of Self-Discovery. And it's all about spiritual principles. And it's done in a fairy tale type setting. And it brings out the principles. What I wanted to do and what I think I've done is simplify the spiritual concepts that can be really difficult for us to understand by doing it in a story format, in a childlike type story. And I'm so excited. It's actually a revision of the first book I wrote, Taming the Dragon. But I learned so much over that 30 years in between about the writing process and about the storytelling process. And it's just much better than it was the first time I did it. And the thing is, Dragons to Butterflies tells my story. Brutal detail. The Final Mile Home talks about the spiritual principles that I had to use to get through Dragons to Butterflies, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
What was something I was going to ask you was how therapeutic was the actual writing process? Because I can only imagine going into all those details and having to actually put pen to paper and almost admit that it was real must have been quite taxing.
it was incredibly taxing and incredibly cathartic. I had to go back to therapy because in order for me to write in the detail that I wrote in about the pain that I endured as a child, I had to go back there. I had to go back to that mobile home that I grew up in with all that abuse. I had to revisit it. It was because I wanted the reader to be able to read it and say, this guy has really been there. He knows what I went through. He knows me. So I even had to remember what our home smelled like. Like it was growing up in that mobile home, we had absolutely no privacy, none. It didn't exist, and there were all kinds of really sad things going on. And I had to re-feel those things to be able to write authentically about those things. So I had to go back to therapy, and fortunately, the therapist that I go to has been my therapist off and on for 35 years. And she said to me because I started taking the chapters to her as I wrote them, and she said, "Oh my God, Johnny, I'm sorry." She said, "I know most of these stories." She said, "But I never put them together as though they were one lifetime, that one person had lived through all this." She said, I can't imagine that. She said, so she apologized. She said, I never did that. We dealt with it one story at a time, which was probably perfect. So yeah, it was very cathartic. And my first 12-step sponsor, who is now my business partner, was reading that book every day. After I'd write a chapter, he'd read a chapter. And he said basically the same thing. He said, "Johnny, I never put all this together. I'm sorry." He said, but he kept telling me every time he would read a chapter, "Johnny, you have to finish this." Because part of my history has been I don't finish things, which is a trait of an adult child of an alcoholic. We don't finish things. I have learned to finish things. One of my 12-step sponsors said I was an 8-inning ball player. So now with whatever I do, I try to make sure I play the 9th inning. So I am totally committed to this work. I'm in love with this work. So yeah, the writing process was, for all 3 books, was very cathartic and very healing and very agonizing at times.
I can imagine. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the podcast that you do for the Mental Health Network Radio. But before we do that, I see we've got a question from Nikki. She'd like to know, how do you manage your thoughts through anxiety and panic attacks? So you did mention that you hadn't had for 8 years, but perhaps if you can recall to when last you had the inclination that you might just have one and how you worked through it. So she says she can understand how it's possible when they're not there, but when you're in the midst of one, how do you get through it?
Well, I have to connect with somebody. That's the first thing. I can't get myself through it by myself. An insane mind can't heal an insane mind. And I have to get with someone that I trust. And one of the things I've learned about having PTSD is you stop trusting people, if you ever trusted them to start with, or anybody to start with. I never trusted anyone after my mother died, no one. And so finding someone that I feel like I can be real and honest with, and somebody, for me, it's important that whoever I connect with is somebody that's been where I am at the moment. So because if you've never experienced a full-on anxiety or panic attack, you can't coach somebody through that. It takes someone that's been there. It takes someone that can say, "No, wait a minute, let's rethink this. Let's back up. Let's try to take a breath. And I was fortunate that I had somebody there for all of that, that could do that with me. So, but connection connection is very, very important. So I have to do that, and then I have to be totally 100% honest with whoever I'm talking to about the fear that's going on. And today, how I deal with that when it even starts is I remind myself that at the root of anxiety is fear. And so I start asking myself, what am I so afraid of? And I try to do that with someone if I got someone that will listen. And usually what I find out is that the thing that I'm afraid of most of the time isn't even real. It's a fabrication. Now, sometimes it is real. I'm not saying never, but it's for me today, it's an investigation of my thinking, because my thinking starts all of that. I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to your podcast, Morph into a New You, it's part of the Mental Health News radio network. So you have guests in the mainstream of healing on the current mental health issues. And I've seen quite a few notable guests on your podcast. Tell us a little bit about how you got started with that and how it helps you in your mental health journey.
It's kind of a funny story. In the beginning, after I wrote Dragons to Butterflies, I had a publicist for a short while. And actually, I had a they were sending out letters about my book and this and that, and they sent one to Mental Health News Radio Network. So they approached me, they got my book, they read my book, and they approached me about being a guest. Well, in the process, I talked to Kristen Sananta Walker several times about the show before we did the show, and then several times after the show. And at that time, she was just putting Mental Health News Radio Network together. And she said, Johnnie, you need to have your own podcast. And I said, what's a podcast? She said, you were just a guest on one. So I didn't even know what they were. I had no idea. And she said, you need to have your own podcast. And I'm like, well, how in the world do you do that? She said, I'm going to help you with that. So she helped me put together my podcast. And the tagline to that podcast, Morph into a New You, the tagline is, if you want to change your life, you got to change your mind about your life. You can't hold on to the same thinking and change your actions. So if I change my thinking, I can change my life. And that's the whole focus of what my podcast is about. And that's how I got started. And I really, in the last several months, haven't done very many podcasts with people because I've been focused on getting this next book out. And I've been focused on, right now, what I'm doing that I love is people approach me to help them tell their story, help them write their story. And I get to go there with them and be for them what my therapist was for me, in helping them face the story they want to tell in a way that they can tell it authentically. And I love storytelling. I love storytelling.
Yes, well, you are a good storyteller, as we can attest from this evening so far. I'd like to know, we always share a bit about where we were at with our mental health journeys in these kind of sessions, and then there's always a bit of a focus on tools and resources for coping. And you've already mentioned a few, such as the 12 Steps program and possibly A Course in Miracles. But are there any other resources that have really helped you along your mental health journey?
I've done along the way, I've tried everything that came down the pike. I've done Healing Your Inner Child workshops, intensive workshops. I lived at a spiritual retreat for 6 months in the Ozark Mountains. For me, the answer has always been in spirit, and I'm not a biblical person, but I do think of myself as a spiritual person. Actually, I think we all are. It's just whether or not we're willing to admit it. So I've always looked for the spiritual answer. So I've gone the route of A Course in Miracles, because if I get real honest, the main help in my life has been A Course in Miracles, and the way it has helped me to really discover and live with an unconditionally loving God. there's a line in the Course in Miracles that was really one of the lines that sold me on it. My very introduction of it was, it says, "You need not ask God for forgiveness, for God has never condemned you." And that just really magnified the whole unconditionally loving God for me. And that's what I needed, because the things that I'd done in my life, I couldn't see somebody being able to forgive me for. Well, it's not a big deal to forgive somebody you've never been upset with. So I didn't have to ask God for forgiveness anymore. I just had to accept that he'd already forgiven me, because in his mind, there was nothing to forgive.
Yeah. No, that's definitely more comforting than the alternative.
Yes.
A couple of things I wanted to share with you and everyone else with regards to my story and some parallels that I found with yours. You mentioned being basically an alcoholic at age 13 or 14, or having started drinking properly at 11. And I personally had alcohol-induced depression at age 14. So I had a similar kind of experience where I was binge drinking over the weekends. So also every opportunity that we got, we would just get out of hand completely. And after a few months of that, it took its toll on my poor teenaged body and brain. And I just started not wanting to go to school, and like locking myself up in my room and refusing to come out. And yeah, that wound up with a diagnosis of alcohol-induced depression, which was my very first mental health diagnosis, if you want to put it like that. So yeah, that I identify with you there. Something, yes, Hanika, you got a hand up? Just go off mute.
Sorry. My question to you, Johnny, is how come you thought that you were responsible for your mum's death?
I was actually wondering how long that question was going to take. When my mom went to the hospital, is it Hanukkah?
Yes, Hanukkah.
When my mom went to the hospital, she looked as healthy as anybody sitting here. Actually, may have even looked healthier than I do, but and she was in the hospital for 6 months before I could visit, because there was a law in Kentucky at the time that you had to be 14 years old to visit in a hospital. So I couldn't go see my mom. I'm going to get emotional here. But when they realized she was actually dying, she wanted to see her boy. I was her only son, and I was her youngest child. And so when they told me I was finally going to get to go see my mom, I got all excited, and I'm like, oh boy, I'm going to get to see my mom. Well, she had cancer, really, really bad. We're talking 1964. They still don't know what to do with cancer. So in 1964, they didn't have a clue what they were up against. So I'm all excited about going to see my mom, but in order for me to see her, my sisters had to sneak me up the fire escape, my sisters and my grandmother. And that in and of itself was a traumatic experience. I mean, that fire escape was scary. It was like 6 floors up, and but I was going to see my mom. When I walked into that hospital room, that woman laying in that bed, was not my mom. She looked horrible. Now, I was 5 years old. I didn't know what death looked like, but I knew that that person in that bed wasn't long for this world. And her cheeks were all sunk in. She was this real chalk white complexion. Her eyes were kind of hollow. Some of her hair was gone. And she had this part that sticks out in my mind more than any of them. She had this blister on her lip that actually looked like snot. So I just kind of turned my back on her and walked to the end of the bed. And all I wanted at that point was to get out of that room. And she said to my grandmother and my sister, she said, get him out of here. He doesn't need to see me like this. And then she asked me for a goodbye kiss.
Oh.
And I said, no. I can't believe it still gets me this way. But and then when I got home, my dad was drunk. And my sister told my dad what had happened. Not like she was telling on me. She was just telling him what happened. And I got a spanking. And the whole time he was spanking me with his big belt, he was saying, here your mom lies on her deathbed and you, her only son, won't even kiss her goodbye. And the next time I saw her, she was in a casket. And a child looks for reason. I wanted a reason for why that could happen, how that could happen. And now, my mom had always kept me protected from my dad's violence and from his drinking. She always shrouded me so that I didn't really know what he was doing or what he was up to. Now then, all of a sudden, I'm not protected. And I'm seeing him beat my sister and my grandmother up. I'm hearing him. I never saw it, but I hear him when he would take my sister into the back room, and I would hear what he was doing to my sister. And I'm like, in that little boy's mind, that was all my fault. So
thank you so much for sharing that with us. Really do appreciate it. Yeah, and it is weird. There's some emotional traumas that whenever you go back into them, it's always going to feel as intense as almost as it did then. Okay.
I did not realize that was going to do that to me today. So, because a lot of times today I can tell that story and I still feel it, but not like I did just now. So I had no idea that was going to happen, but
caught you
it
unawares.
played out like it was supposed to.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question, though, Hanukkah.
Yes, thanks, Hanukkah. Are there any other questions from the people in the audience or even comments? And while you either put up your hand or switch on your camera and wave at me, one very poignant part of your story to me was when you started writing letters from God to yourself. That seemed like the most caring thing any person could do for themselves in terms of getting in touch with themselves spiritually. And the way you described the letters being supportive and encouraging, that really seemed like a very beautiful experience to me. What was that like?
It was absolutely amazing. It still is. I still write those letters. A lot of times, my downslope with my mental health issues always starts with sleep deprivation. So if around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning I'm not going to sleep, I'll get up and write a letter. And today, sometimes I actually write those letters to not just to me from God and not just from me to God. I'll write a letter to me from my dad or a letter to my dad because I have totally forgiven my dad. And by the time my dad died, we were actually friends, close friends. So my sister, who protected me throughout most of my childhood, passed 2.5 years ago. And I'll write a letter to or from her and get connected with that love. But it gets me so connected. But there's a couple of rules that I have with those letters. When they're to me, if they are not loving, gentle, encouraging, and kind, it's my ego writing to me and not God. Because the ego hates when I love myself. It's no, you can't feel good about you. So, and when I write from my dad or my mom or my sister, they have to be loving, encouraging, gentle, and kind. And now when I'm writing, because today sometimes I write letters, a lot of times actually I write letters to God. And the rule for that one is I have to be honest, no matter how embarrassed I might be about what I've caught myself at, about what I'm needing help with, because you can't heal a lie. If you're going to therapy and you're not telling the therapist the truth, you're really just wasting everybody's time. So those letters are like me going to therapy. And if I'm not telling the truth in those letters, I'm not opening the door for my own healing. Does that make sense?
Definitely. And I think it's quite easy to get into an autopilot mode where you do just not pay attention. I see Selena has put her hand up. Selena, what is your question?
Hi, yes. I think my question is basically just about shame. You mentioned that you had to go back and get a beginner's chip at some point, and also being homeless. And I imagine that in itself brought some level of shame, and just going through life so like having to ask for help so many times, having to humble yourself so many times. Did you ever get to a point where you felt like it was just too much and it was just so exhausting having to ask for help over and over again? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, yes, I have been there many times. When I had that crash with the depression and the bipolar and the PTSD in 2007, I did not want to go back to AA or NA or any of my 12-step people and say, man, I really need help. I didn't want to do that. And that's why I say today, the two things that'll kill an alcoholic or drug addict more than anything are AA pride and spiritual arrogance, when we think we've been doing this long enough that we don't still need help. I've been sober now. I had the 6 years. Then I had that relapse, and now then I've been, November 15th was 29 years. And I still have to be willing to ask for help because we don't get done. There's a book that I read called Illusions by an author named Richard Bach. And one of the lines he has in there is, here's how you know if your journey here on earth is done. If you're still here, it's not. So I'm still here, and I'm still here learning. And there's in the 12-step programs, what they really drive home to us is that, you know, there's 3 spiritual principles that we have to adhere to, and that's honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And my way of trying to hold on to the open-mindedness is to remind myself constantly, I don't know what's going on. I don't, you know, with the state of the nation now and what's going on with all this COVID and all this stuff, I don't know what the right thing is to do. So I have to turn to somebody, for me, which is God, and say, okay, this is in your hands. If there's something you want me to do, let me know and I'll help. And when the COVID first hit the United States, I think it was 6 weeks after we had identified it that I read online somewhere, and I don't know if it's the truth, but I read it. It said that our suicide rate in the United States in those 6 weeks had already escalated by 35%. And to me, that was devastating. So every night for probably 3 weeks, I would think of that, and I would sit here at my house by myself, and I would start crying, and I'd say, God, what can I do? And at one point it came to me that what I could do was give my books away. And then I said, God, I can't afford to do that. They cost me money. And so then the thought occurred. I don't want to say God talked to me, but the thought occurred to me as a result of that statement to him. It was that if you put it out there that you need help giving these books away, people will help. So I started posting everywhere I could on social media that I needed donations to pay for the books so that I could give them away. And my contribution would be the time that would be in it and my royalties from the book, because I didn't get anything from those books. And I ended up giving away 500 books. And so it's just important that I do what I can. So I hope, Selena, that helped answer your question.
Thanks, Johnny. Yes, I think that it did. Thanks, Selena, for that question. Cool. She said yes in the chat. Madam L, is your hand up? Is that a question that you have? Madam L, you're on mute if you're speaking. Okay, no, it just looks like she's given some applause in the chat there. But if you've got your hand up, just unmute yourself and feel free to ask away. Nikki, go ahead.
Am I on?
Oh, okay. Nikki, hang on a second. Yes, now we can hear you, Mama.
No, Nikki can go ahead. I was just waving. No, I have no question. I'm just listening
Okay.
attentively.
Okay.
What is it, Karen? I'm good.
100%.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Johnny, I just want to say your story has really resonated with me. My oldest brother was an alcoholic and had a car accident and broke his nose in 3 places, just like you. He was in recovery, but unfortunately he committed suicide. And his little boy actually was 4 years old when he died, and he started being abused by his mother, but luckily we got custody of him. But he has reactive attachment disorder. Like you say, you can't trust anybody. He's exactly the same as that, but he is in therapy and everything. And my godson is 5, and he just lost his mother to cancer. So that story of yours really resonated with me, because he did see his mom in a hospital bed like you. He was my best friend. So it's just, your story is just absolutely amazing. It's just really resonated with me and everything that's happened in my life. So I really want to thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Nikki. All right. One more thing I'd like to touch on that you spoke of was how you think that all of this negativity is based in or rooted in fear. And it's that whole thing of what is the opposite of love is not hate, it's fear, I think. Could you talk a bit more to that?
Yeah. Course in Miracles says many different times throughout its extensive book that there are only really 2 emotions, and that is love and fear. And everything else that we see, and we put these different labels on it, is just fear showing up under a mask, so to speak. One of the tools I used to help me forgive my dad was to identify his rage as his fear. And the more angry someone is, the ego will tell us that anger is power. And so if you think about it, when somebody's really, really angry and really expressing that anger, we get frightened by them because they seem like someone that's got the power to hurt us. So when I got to the point where I could see my dad as being this really, really terrified little boy that was just trying to keep himself safe, even though he was attacking everybody, it opened my heart to him. And it allowed me to find a place where he and I are the same, because I lived with the same terror that he lived with. I just expressed it differently. And in finding that link between he and I, there's a line in the Course in Miracles that says your true healing lies in your identifying with your sameness. And the sameness was, I believe there's love within every one of us. I don't care how evil your actions are. There's love in there. It's just buried under a mountain of fear. So the connection is, we all want more than anything. I don't care how angry you are. I don't care. And this is just my opinion. We all want more than anything to love and to be loved. Unfortunately, that love that we are so hungry for is also the thing that we are the most afraid of, especially if you're coming from a traumatized childhood, if you're coming from any kind of abuse, because you don't trust it. If you were a traumatized child, an abused child, especially if you were abused by someone in your family, then the way the child sees it is, you're supposed to be protecting me. You're supposed to be keeping me safe, but you're simultaneously the person that I am the most afraid of, because you're the one that's hurting me the most. So if the person that's supposed to be loving you more than anybody else on this planet is simultaneously the one that's hurting you, who are you going to trust? Why would you trust somebody? So the greatest challenge in dealing with someone in that place with PTSD, or any of the things actually, the first step is trying to open a little door of hope, because hope is a great antidote for fear. And then from the hope, hopefully, will spring trust in someone. And once we begin to really trust someone, then we can start growing.
Beautiful. Thank you. So we're looking forward to your next book, The Last Mile.
Final
Spiritual,
mile.
The final mile. Thanks.
The final mile home.
Final mile home. All right. I'm going to ask that you put a link to your website in the chat, just so that if anyone would like to keep up to date with your latest books or any of the previous ones, as well as your podcast, they can reach it through there. I also just wanted to identify with you on the note of your troubles always start with sleep deprivation. I've also got bipolar disorder, and it's very clear to me that when I'm well, I naturally want to sleep enough. And when I'm feeling a bit off kilter, I suddenly want to sleep less, first of all, but then it's almost like I start getting addicted to sleeping less and less and less and less, and feeling more energetic even though I'm sleeping less. So I definitely keep a close eye on that particular aspect of my life to try and make sure that I, instill good habits in terms of the sleeping thing, and can get a wake-up call when I see that it's rearing its head again.
I really want to say something to that. The thing for me is, because there's still times when I first lay down to go to sleep that I'll have an instant of like fear. It's like, I'm not going to be able to sleep. Well, what I do with that today as a combatant for it, I don't really like that word, but is I just get up and do something positive. I'll get up and I'll start writing on my next book. I'll get up and I'll write a blog about a certain aspect of mental health issues or child abuse or any of that. And once I've done that, or if I get up and write a letter to myself from God, or from me to God, or whatever kind of letter I need to write in the moment, it gets me reconnected with reality. And because for me, my sleep deprivation magnifies whatever fear I've got going on in my life. It just blows it up. And if I lay there and ruminate in it, I'm not ever going to go to sleep. So
that makes sense.
I gotta change again. It goes back to the thought coaching thing. I gotta, when you're doing it for yourself and you don't have an actual thought coach, when you're doing it for yourself, I call it thought management. I have to manage my mind. I have to become the master of my mind and not let it become the master of me.
For sure. Cool. Does anyone have any other questions? If not, I'd like to wrap up with a question that I am now going to start asking all of my Out of My Mind Box guest speakers, and that is, what do you do to get out of your mind box? That is, relax, de-stress, decompress.
Are you asking me that question?
Yes, you.
Okay. Well, one of the passions that I have today is raising butterflies. And building butterfly gardens. And I talk about that a lot in my book, Dragons to Butterflies. And so and my whole yard is a butterfly garden. And so around 2 o'clock every afternoon, I got butterflies all over the place. So if I can connect with them, one of the things I do is a lot of our butterflies are on the endangered species list, because every butterfly will only lay their egg on one plant, and it's a different plant for every species of butterfly. So unfortunately, a lot of those plants that the butterflies lay their eggs on are considered to be weeds, and people are constantly trying to get rid of the weeds. Well, when they do that, they shut off the butterfly life cycle. So, and the caterpillar and the egg of the butterfly have hundreds of predators. So what I do once I get a caterpillar on one of my plants is I take it and put it in a screened in cage. I call it my butterfly hatchery. And then I feed them in there until they grow and become butterflies, and then I can release them. But that gets me so connected to something that's bigger than me, and something that is absolutely beautiful. And the whole process from watching them lay the egg to watching them come out of the chrysalis and become a butterfly, it's all fascinating to me. I've been doing it for over 15 years, and it never gets old.
Wow. That does sound magical. Great.
Wow, indeed. Wow.
So amazing. I don't know if
It's
anybody in
amazing.
Joburg has noticed that there's like no butterflies here.
I was caught in a swarm of white butterflies just a couple of days ago, thankfully.
Yeah, we have the white butterflies that come like from December to February.
But no
other than
others.
that, yeah.
It's true, it's true. We should start a butterfly garden.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, Johnnie. And I know it takes a lot to kind of, even for a seasoned storyteller like yourself, to come and put yourself out there in front of a group of people that you don't know from a bar of soap. So thank you for taking that leap, taking that risk with me. You got in touch with me after, I'm not sure if it was yourself or your publicist found my website, and you shared your mental health story synopsis with me, and said you hoped I could use it. So I have used it. Thank you kindly for sharing it with us. And I think for just putting out there more stories about mental health so that people can have less stigma about it and feel more comfortable in sharing their own stories as well. So thank you very much.
I'm so honored to be here, and I'm so grateful that so many people were here.
Great.
So thank you, Hanukkah.
So yes, Johnnie's website, johnniecalloway.com, or you can email him on johnnie@johnniecalloway.com. And my mom says your website is fantastic. And we're tech people, so that's saying something.
Well, it's being worked on right now. We're trying to actually put a store on it, because what I just finished was the audio version of Dragons to Butterflies done in my voice. And I can't wait for that to be released. It was difficult to do because, just like you just saw, sometimes still telling the story, I get emotional. So there's parts in the book where it's like, so there's that. And then the other book, The Final Mile, will be on there soon. And yeah, and I have greeting cards and everything. So
awesome. Go check out Johnnie's website and everything he's got to offer. And Johnnie, of course, you are welcome to come back and attend any of my Out of My Mind box sessions. I will keep you in the loop via email. They happen the first Friday of every month, except for January. I've decided I'm taking a break. So first Friday in February, but I'll keep you posted on that.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you to everybody who made the time to be here this evening and who shared and participated.
Thank you so much. Really, thank you.
All right.
Really appreciate it.
If anyone wants to stay behind for a chat, I'm here. Otherwise, please go and enjoy your weekend.
Cheers,
thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.